won't do it. They trail by 4. 30 seconds left. Applewhite is sacked. Ball's loose. Brooks forced the fumble, and they're still wrestling at the bottom of the pile. A&M thinks they have it. This is the game. It is over. Aggies have got it.
And welcome everyone to Lone Star Yell Fight, where we're talking all things college football, Texas Aggies, Texas Longhorns, from the greatest country in these United States. All right, everybody, welcome to a mid-afternoon episode of Lone Star Yell Fight. Andy is with us, and we're going to pretend like we didn't record a whole episode earlier that was awesome with lots of technical issues. Right, Andy?
It's a holiday week and people do things at odd times during the holiday week. So, I'm probably going to make dressing twice because I'm trying to figure out a recipe. So it's a week of do-overs.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder what kind of dressing Central Market's making for us, because that's how we roll.
Understand?
Yeah.
It's going to have sage or something weird.
Yeah, it probably will, right? With a little patchouli in there just to really match the Austin vibe.
Very Austin, yes.
The T-sip vibe, right? The whole thing. All right, Andy. So it's weird because we're back with A&M and Longhorns. And if you're watching this and didn't know, this will be the first time they've played in 13 years, since 2011.
Has it been that long? I have no reference because no one has said anything about it all year long.
Juan Soto's age, Colt McCoy's dad was roommates with Jordan Shipley's dad, and this game hasn't been played since 2011.
Does the game own a bass boat?
I think the winners get a bass boat. I don't know if it's like the whole team or just like, is it Sark? But Sark doesn't strike me as a
Cotton Holdings bass boat. Sounds good.
It must be. And I'm not sure that Sark is really a bass boat kind of guy. So I don't know. I don't know about Elko, but I don't really get that kind of vibe from him.
Elko's very much a bass boat kind of guy.
Do you think so?
Yeah, I bet there's a whole lot of camouflage in Elko's closet.
Okay. Him and Governor. Wow, we're back on the election. Andy, the thing is, one of the things that I really wanted to do when we created the show was take it from a actual graduate of the university's experience. And sometimes Jessica thinks it's elitist of me, and I don't mean it to be, but there is a difference, right? When you went to the university and you're with him, good, bad, or ugly, versus, I mean, I know a guy who's a Longhorn football fan and a Kentucky basketball. You know what I mean? Like it's not disposable for us.
Well, I mean, the historical was Florida State, Dallas Cowboys, Chicago Bulls, and probably somebody for hockey or Yankees.
Yeah, of course, the Yankees. Everyone's really a Yankee fan if you didn't know deep down. You and I have not been super excited about this game coming back, and I don't really know how to articulate why I wasn't, but why weren't you?
I mean, ultimately, it's because my life hasn't been any different from a football fandom perspective, playing the game or not playing the game. The SEC has provided a number of very tough opponents, and up until this year, when the schedule changed because of the addition of Texas and that small secular school in Norman, we played LSU every year. We played Alabama every year. We played Auburn every year. We played Florida a lot more than we probably should have. So we had opponents that were marquee opponents. Now, outside of LSU and maybe Arkansas, were any of those true rivalries that go back 120 years? Well, no, that's not a thing that we had. But I don't know that matters. I don't know how much it mattered to me. And so adding Texas back to the schedule, I know it's supposed to be special, and God love them, ESPN is trying to make me feel like it's special. I had to turn off notifications on my phone because they just won't give up. It's another game against a good opponent at the end of the year, and we have a lot of those. So
that's a great point, because I feel like you helped me articulate when A&M first left and it was a whole thing, we were sort of sold as Texas fans that we would become or push more into the whole national brown. Like there was even floated Texas and Notre Dame every Thanksgiving. I do think for our fan base, when it became a rotation of TCU and Texas Tech, and then for a while, every game was at home, which meant the stadium started getting half full because not everybody's you're going to skip every single Thanksgiving of your college career at home. I do think maybe from a Longhorn perspective, that might be why the most reason why it's back, because it's regular and something that matters, when we were sold a thing that really didn't happen. When
Well, yeah, and I think to that point, as much as Tech and Baylor and TCU want to feel like they are your rivals as at the University of Texas, there is a rivalry between A&M and Texas. And
Mhm.
it would be silly for us to pretend that there isn't a rivalry there. We've seen it over the last 12 years in basketball, in volleyball, in baseball, in really every sport but football.
Right.
And so, yeah, I don't know how much you get up for, especially some of the seasons that Texas, I'm not picking, but Texas has not had the best run in the last 12 years.
No.
The last two have
Mm-mm.
been good, but getting up to play a 6-5 Texas Tech team at home on Thanksgiving. All right, well, I did that last year. I don't know that I need to do it again. So yeah, that's my point. In contrast, we had LSU come in, and LSU hated playing on Thanksgiving. So we, of course, scheduled our games on Thanksgiving as much as, because screw them, that's why.
They needed a gumbo. Football be like that sometimes. You know what, though? You bringing up the other sports, though, because the baseball rivalry hasn't gotten any less heated. In fact, it's gotten more. I mean, volleyball seems intense. Maybe that's why, for those of us who follow every single A&M and Longhorn sport, it's not that big a deal that it's back, because in many ways it never really left.
Yeah, and I think the competition between the two schools, as much as I think that they have a lot more in common than we give them credit for, competition between the two schools, especially on the athletic field, it has not lessened. There's one less sport that we have played for the last 13 years. Once we got back to scheduling Texas for that midweek game every year, once we got back to, honestly, it just made sense. Why aren't you playing the other premier Division I school that's 90 miles away
That's
from
not
you,
90 miles away, right?
instead of trying to, make it feel like Abilene Christian's a great place to play in the middle of the week. Um, it logistically it makes sense for the Olympic sports, the non-football sports, and now it makes sense for football again. But the competition goes deeper than that. There are friendly rivalries in every walk of life between alumni of the two school, whether it's in the courtroom, whether it's on the oil field, whether it's um, in the halls of Congress and the state legislature. All of
Unless
those
Baylor's
things.
involved in the state legislature, and then it all just goes to hell. But it's a whole other conversation for maybe a different show.
Well, that's the only reason Baylor's still relevant, isn't it?
It really is. But you're right. Like, in our first edition of the show, you brought up the whole concept, like Longhorns hire Longhorns, Aggies hire Aggies, or Longhorns hire Aggies, or Aggies hire Longhorns, and not a whole lot of people are hiring the people from Sam Houston State. Like, there is a
Right.
little. It is friendlier than I think people think it is. To use a Texas comparison, there is a burning hatred for the University of Oklahoma. We've talked before about Bonfire, and when Bonfire happened, all the or a lot of the student organizations at Texas did what they could to help. I don't know that we do the same thing if something happened in Norman, and we all know that they get a tornado there every like 6 weeks.
Well, I assume that you were no longer allowed to cross the border, or maybe that's not until January 11th. The Red River is off limits, so we'll have to show papers.
Must be.
That's the thing that's probably happening. Yeah, it's just my family goes to Texas, or my family goes to A&M, and yeah, I've got members of my family that go elsewhere, but it's not the same with LSU. I'm sure it's not the same with you guys in OU, or Arkansas, or any of the other schools that pretend they are your rivals.
I might have more family that went to LSU even than OU, because I
Yeah.
got a couple of those.
So I mean, we're at each other's workplaces, we're in each other's schools, we're each other's grocery stores. It's and even this, and I assume it is still true this way. It certainly was true back when these two schools were playing every year. Even if you went to Tech or Baylor or U of H or any of the other schools, you had a rooting interest in one versus the other when Texas and A&M played at the end of November.
100%. And in fact, we had Reed Zimmerman on when you couldn't make it, and he talked about the conflict of he's gotten into two of the best schools at both UT and A&M, and he's really torn on which one to go for. but he also said no matter where he goes, he's still gonna be an Aggie. Now we both know you might get sucked into the. It's hard if you go to Ohio State and not buy in, right? Like,
Right. Well, and you
but
should enjoy your
and you
college
should buy in.
experience.
Yeah, you should buy in. We both know a guy in Astros Twitter whose son, I think, for the first half of his first semester at Arkansas was still wearing Longhorn gear, but I'm pretty sure he was wearing Razorback gear when Texas came up. As well he should, because enjoy yourself.
And hey, all you Texas State folks, if you don't hear anything else in this show, remember that your school plays Division I football too.
Yes, you do. And you know what? So does UTSA. And I went there before there was football. They used to sell T-shirts that said "Still undefeated." I had one. Isn't that cute?
Yeah, Texas woman still has that shirt.
Really, I love it. So, how do you see where the game is going to fit going forward? You sent me a video of Colt McCoy, and what besides him not being the best podcaster, um, there's definitely a lot of he did his best, right, to not feel like there was orange blood flowing through his veins because everything he did in his pitch to the game was pretty equal until he got to make his score prediction, and it was like Texas running away with it. On the field, these teams have both have definite holes and weaknesses, right?
Yeah, and that's I guess my concern. The interesting thing about this show is that neither one of the hosts thinks their school is going to win on Saturday. So that'll be interesting to see who's right and who's wrong.
Yeah, who's going to apologize to the other one?
Yeah, my concern from the A&M standpoint is that Texas scores a lot of points in the first quarter, and the last few weeks A&M gives up a lot of points in the first quarter, dating back to the LSU game. And so there's very much a world where those two things play out the way they've played out for the last several weeks, and Texas is walking into the second quarter or into halftime with a 2-3 score lead. That if that happens, A&M's not going to win the game. I don't think there is a 21 point comeback against the Texas defense as it's currently constructed. Um, A&M's going to have to play, I don't say a flawless game, but pretty close to flawless, and not from a turnover perspective, because I think those are going to happen. Texas generates turnovers, A&M's defense generates turnovers. I think it's more of a
And both have
being
defenses to survive a turnover. We saw
yeah,
it with Texas versus Georgia, right? Like they kept giving the ball up, but it still didn't necessarily lead to points all the time.
right. And so, complementary football, the defense is going to have to support when the offense screws up, but the offense has to limit their screw ups, and that includes play calling. That includes um, doing things that will help you win the game rather than score style points or for recruiting. And I certainly have been guilty of charging Sark with that a little bit. I don't know he's going to have the freedom to do that in this game. At least I hope he does, and I hope it's close enough where he doesn't feel like now I can just pass the ball because it's fun.
Right.
Um, Similarly, I hope Colin Klein opens up the playbook for Marcel Reed because I think they're trying to turn him into a pocket passer, which I guess is what they need to do to win. And I think his strength at this point in his development is the RPO game, and you've seen not enough of that, in my opinion. I think that if A&M is to beat Texas, it's going to be a lot largely on Marcel Reed's shoulders, and he's going to have to play at least as well as he did against Auburn.
Yeah, and I think go into that a little bit because I think he's a really dynamic quarterback that's going to be really good for you guys for a really long time. I don't know if maybe this is the year that we're going to see that because I do think with talent around him and injuries, he might be pretty one dimensional pretty quickly. But tell me just about what you see as far as what you think he's going to be able to do against you guys. And I will point out that Colin Klein went to Kansas State for like 19 years, and he did a really good
Yes.
job beating Texas for all 19 of those years. So maybe
He was
that's
a
that
Heisman finalist for at least 17 of those,
he,
so
he
good
really
for him.
was. He really based on
Uh,
one game sometimes.
yeah, Marcel Reed is a redshirt freshman, and he's a redshirt freshman that came from Tennessee. And as much as all states think their high school football is awesome, it's different when you're making that jump from I think he was a 4A player, or the
Yeah.
equivalent of Texas 4A player. You're playing bigger, faster guys at every position. And he certainly is up to game speed, but he doesn't have the level of experience that he's going to see across the line when we look at Quinn Ewers, who's in his third year of starting at a D1 program. So there are things that Marcel Reed is learning on the fly. Colin Klein's job is to make this game as easy as possible for him, and it's going to require scheming beyond what we've seen from Klein so far this year. And I know some of that is we are limited in skill players. Our wide receivers aren't the best in the world. Texas certainly has an advantage there. Our running back,
Are all hurt.
Arum, suffered a big blow when Le'Veon Moss went out for the season. There is this weird rumor that we're going to get a guy who's supposed to be out for the season back for Saturday. I can't imagine that Reuben Owens, if he is back, is going to be effective because he hasn't carried a ball since sometime in early August. Um, but great, maybe that happens. Maybe his injury is healed enough and he's been secretly practicing. I don't think in the world of 2024 you can secretly do anything on a
With
football team.
19,000 websites dedicated to each
Yeah,
school looking to break something.
but let's pretend.
Billy Lucci's
So
hanging from the ceiling at the practice facility trying to see whatever he can
I
find.
think he goes underground,
Does
frankly.
he get, does he?
The large man, he needs to not fly.
Yeah.
But that's the issue that AM's going to have is that Marcel Reed is going to have to be put in situations where he can succeed, and Texas's defense provides not a lot of opportunity for that. I think they have, if there's a weakness, I think it's on the defensive line, and I know that if I watch a Texas game, all they talk about is how great the defensive line is. The strength of the defense for Texas to me is your secondary.
Secondary and a linebacking core this year for
Yeah, I
sure.
think you've got really good guys that are going to cover the field and turn A&M into what is potentially a one-dimensional team. The good news for A&M is that A&M's defense has the potential to do that too, because A&M's defense, especially in the front seven, are as good as what Georgia put on the field against Texas several weeks ago. So there's a path for A&M to win this game. I don't think it's going to be a blowout, but A&M's going to have to come to play from the first snap and not wake up sometime in the middle of the second quarter and go, "Oh, now we can score points."
One of the big concerns I have, and it's you saw it in the Texas Kentucky game, where Quinn Ewers was obviously hurt, and we were both saying you're up comfortably. Why wouldn't you go to Arch Manning for the second half? And it's almost like, and I could be reading the tea leaves way into this, but it's almost like Sark is so worried about Ewers's mental makeup when Arch goes in the game at this point that my fear is if it comes out and Ewers still can't move and he's still pretty ineffective, does Sark have what it takes to pull to go with Manning if that's what he feels like he needs to do? Like I think that all things being equal and everybody's healthy, Ewers needs to be your guy, but he's not really a big runner anyway. And if he's even going to be hobbled just a little bit, that's a big deal.
Yeah, especially knowing that A&M is pretty good at rushing the passer. Even with Texas's offensive line, I think they get to Ewers, especially if he's anyway hobbled. You don't send your starting quarterback to an MRI for no reason, so there's clearly a concern there. It was curious to me that they didn't put Manning in for the second half, or especially when Ewers started looking really ineffective
Mm-hmm.
against Kentucky. I don't pretend to know what any of that's about, but surely Sark has his reasons for doing that. And I think some of it is the mental game with Ewers, because if Texas is going to progress into the playoffs and win games in the playoffs, they're going to need a healthy Quinn Ewers to do that, or at least a mentally in Quinn Ewers to do that. Having said that, if he's hobbled, that's going to hurt Texas's chances in Kyle Field, because you can't plant foot, so you're not throwing balls downfield well, and Ewers has struggled with that a little bit this year
Yeah.
anyway. Um, then if A&M's allowed to focus on the run because they're not worried about Ewers connecting downfield, that hurts Texas's chances to score. And A&M defense is very much a pile-on kind of defense that when they get you down, they will continue to rush, they continue to blitz the quarterback until he can't throw, and they'll get in his head. Add to that the home field advantage that I know we have, varying degrees of how effective that is, but Kyle Field, if A&M's in the game, is going to be very loud and really the most hostile environment you guys have been in all year, and probably the most hostile since you went to Alabama in
Yeah.
week 2 last year. So it's going to be interesting to see how Ewers handles that. I don't think he's going to fold or fade or anything like that, but I think it gives, there's a reason they usually give you 3 points for having home field.
And that's yeah, that makes a ton of sense. How much of it do you think is going to affect both teams? Because having not played in this game, and I hate that I'm using the same cliche that we've been hearing all week, but it's an environment they haven't seen. Neither team has even, the expectations. And one of the things you have to give credit to A&M for is, they've been saying this was a big game all year, but now it's an actual big game. Not has nothing to do with any of the other stuff off this field. But if A&M wins, they go to the SEC championship, and then they still have a shot at the playoff. I think Texas is probably in the playoff regardless, but I mean, it's a big game for both schools in that way. We don't need to over exaggerate it with all of the T-SIP Aggie bullshit that we've been hearing.
Yeah, well, I mean, like we've talked about, ESPN has to sell a game, and this is the best game this weekend that ESPN has the rights to. You can argue Michigan, Ohio State, although I think that's going to be pretty much a dud because Michigan is
So
not
bad.
good this year. The Iron Bowl doesn't have much of anything outside of Alabama for anybody this year because Alabama, somehow gave Oklahoma a SEC win last week. Um, as much as I don't understand how A&M lost, I really don't understand how Alabama lost that game.
I do not
Um,
either.
so yeah, ESPN is going to continue to push this down our throats. I'm going to continue to get notifications till I figure out how to turn them off on my phone. Knowing that the size of the jock straps that the defensive linemen are going to be changing to. I mean, all the things that we're going to get the minutia of. Game day is showing up at 8 o'clock in the morning on Saturday. They'll have turkey legs and people dressed in both Thanksgiving and Christmas clothes since it's second to last day of the month. It's going to be a festival and a party and chaos. Which team mentally responds to that best? I hope it's A&M. I don't think the moment's going to be too big for either team, but it is going to be something new. And they're kids. As much as we want to pretend that they make money now, so they're employees and they are above having any emotions. They've been hearing it from their classmates. They've been hearing it from people on campus. They've been hearing it from the people who pay their NIL about how important this game is. I'm sure that Texas has, and I know A&M has had former football players come in who have played in this game and express what it means to win this game or lose this game to the team. So that part's been done. Elko's job, from our standpoint, similar to Sark's job, is going to be keep your head in the game, deal with the emotional swings of the game. You can't get too down if you can't get behind. You can't let off the pedal when you get up. So it's going to be a really interesting to see which group of 18 to 22-year-olds responds best.
I was thinking about when you said that. I was thinking about the Ole Miss game last weekend and watching when Dart threw his first interception with 3 minutes to go was clearly so affected by it that when he threw the next interception, I think 50 seconds later, that's exactly what you're talking about. Don't let one play beat you more than once.
Yeah, and that's going to be a challenge for both teams. I think, on paper, I think Texas is better at the secondary, better with skill players, probably has a better running back room at this point with Wisner and Blue,
If
and is
Blue if
probably
Blue hangs on to the football,
well, we
he
hope
needs
that
to,
Blue
he needs Tim McGraw from Friday Night Lights to help him out with that.
something, maybe, or he could do the Omar Epps from the program. Have him
Right.
walk around campus and have a bounty. Uh, Unfortunately, campus is pretty much closed this week at Texas,
Yeah.
so I don't who's going to knock the
All
ball
we're gonna
from
have is another gangbanger with speed. What a good movie. That's a good movie. I don't care what people say.
him. So yeah, there's your program reference for the week. So yeah, it's gonna be a really interesting game. I think on paper Texas has a lot of advantages. A&M's big advantage is that it's played at Kyle Field, and you've got a hungry defense who has been told all year that they're not as good as some other teams. So they're going
Sure.
to play with a bit of chip on their shoulder. Um, I hate to put a game on Marcel Reed, and that's why I keep kind of deferring to Colin Klein and Mike Elko, but they've got to put him in positions where he can succeed. And for me, that's the RPO game.
Mm-hmm.
To confuse your linebackers a little bit, to give them a bunch of eye candy to look at. There's always the hope as a football fan, and we all believe this, that our coaches are always holding something back for the big game. I hope that's true this week. I know it's never true, but
It's
I hope it's
never true.
true.
That was always the going into OU. What are they gonna pull
Yeah.
out once?
Well, that's why we only scored 30 points against Louisiana Tech, is because we were holding back and just playing vanilla football. Okay.
Sure you were, buddy. Yeah, I think you're right. Where's the fan base with Marcel Reed? Again, I watch him. I think he's a dynamic young player. It doesn't surprise me that he's had a bit of regression here and there. Not last week, but there's been a couple of games where he's still growing in the job. He didn't have the job halfway through. It wasn't supposed to be his job, right?
Right.
But I feel like he's going to be a foundational player for you guys. Like I'm wearing my Vince Young. He signed this cap. I'm thinking about Vince, and I'm thinking about Johnny Football. Maybe too big of comparisons from those are once in a generation players, but he seems like a guy
Well,
you
I
can build
mean,
a foundation on.
and that's the problem for A&M fans or A&M quarterbacks, is that everybody wants the next Johnny Manziel. And that guy, like you said, comes around once every 50 years. And it's unfair really to anybody to try to put that on them. Reed has a very dynamic game. He's a coach's kid, so he's smart. He understands, how to play the
Is he a
game.
gym rat too? I'm sorry.
Little coach on the field. Yeah, no, all of that.
Shout out to Scott McIntyre. That was his all-time favorite joke. He's a
But
real
my
gym rat.
point, my point is that he's been around the cerebral part of football his entire life, and his
Sure.
dad drilled a lot of these things into him. His issue is experience right now. For as well as I think he played against Auburn, look at the final stats, he accounted for 360 plus yards and 3 touchdowns. The thing that's going to get remembered is the fumbled snap when they could have iced the game, and that ultimately led to overtime, which led to a loss that shouldn't have happened.
Sure.
So he's very much a mixed bag right now. The good news is he plays with a lot of confidence. I don't know what happened to Connor Wigman, but we saw it against New Mexico State. That whatever is going on between his ears is just it's overwhelmed him. I wish him well in his next stop. I can't imagine any world, like we talked about last week, that he's going to be at A&M next year.
He's in the
Um,
transfer portal by Monday. I think
yeah,
that's when it
but
opens back up. Yeah.
he needs a fresh start somewhere, and I wish him nothing but success. But from a fan base perspective, we have a very interesting fan base. Students are behind everybody. I think that's one of our best things, is that sell 37,000 sports passes. They all show up to the football games, and they all will root on their team. That's one of the advantages we have in Kyle Field. So I think they're all in on Marcel Reed. Young kids like to see the freshmen play because they get to have him for 4 years.
Right.
Um, the alumni are jaded because we've lived through Jimbo for 6 years. We
What do
lived
they
through
call
some
it? Battered
years.
Aggie syndrome? Is that what they're calling it
Yeah,
online?
it's a real thing because we're constantly waiting for the next thing to go bad. There are places on the internet I absolutely will not go on game day because of how negative it is.
Hmm.
Uh, and the NIL and the transfer rules have only made that worse because it feels very mercenary, and so fans have taken that out on the players rather than on the NCAA where that blame should go. So I think he's got all the support in the coaches' locker room. He's got all the support he can need on campus, and the right alumni are in support of Marcel Reed. And by that, I mean the guys who signed the NIL checks, the guys who are going to get him wide receivers next year, the guys who are going to convince Le'Veon Moss to come back. The injury certainly helped, but have a good running back room to support him next year. But for the rest of this year, he's got a lot of growing up to do quickly. And unfortunately, unless somebody steps up out of the blue, he's going to do a lot of it on his own for the next couple of weeks.
I want to talk about the student populations because yeah, A&M is obviously famous for the 12th man, and A&M student population now is quite a bit bigger than Texas. We've talked a bunch about why that is. And part of it is Texas is actively getting smaller. And my fear is we're attracting a lot of students that just don't care about sports. And whether it's their foreign exchange students, it's not part of their culture, whether it just seems like we're seeing less and less buy-in. You feel like that's just going to be how it's going to be, or do you think a run of success will make even the most passive Longhorn student want to at least be part of a thing that seems to be successful?
I mean, it's longer term an issue for you guys, because you do have the city of Austin who does treat the University of Texas like its pro sports program. So that helps. And you have fan interest. You're out of the days where Taco Bell was giving 2 tickets away with the purchase of a meal. And I remember that from when I was living in Austin, that was a thing that happened. Uh, So you've got, if it's not Dell anymore, it's a number of other corporations that are pumping money into that program. The student thing is a little bit more interesting though, because it's not something that's going to happen this year or next year or in 5 years, but 20 years from now, 25 years from now, your alumni base is going to look a lot different.
Sure.
Does the next Joe Jamail that comes out of your campus care about football enough to buy stadium naming rights?
That's a
I
great
mean,
point.
and
Or
I
is he,
don't know.
or, we're going to have rich alumni. That's not the question, but is he supporting the film building versus the football building?
Right. They could decide because they were academically inclined students that that's where they want to put their money. And I think that's part of the fear. I think that's one of the things that drove the move to the SEC, because you do need a better schedule. You do need more marquee matchups. A&M recruits a lot of these same kids that are international students. I think what we do a better job of is, this is probably where part of the cult stuff comes from, is ingraining those international students in going to a game and figuring it out and having fun while you're
Yeah.
there and learning this new American experience, instead of, hey, go to the PCL and study until you die and then take a test and then now you're an engineer. Um,
Is that what your son's doing? Is he just hanging out the PCL?
I don't think he goes to the PCL, but yes, his labs, that's pretty much where he lives.
Yeah.
Uh, and so I think there's a difference there about how much the school cares about ingraining that population of students in there, because I think there has to be more of an outreach. A&M has a natural advantage because the alumni, or the 12th Mountain Foundation, underwrite those student tickets. So they don't
Oh,
pay as much. And that's why, and we, that part of that underwriting is that we raise tickets for everybody else, so we only have to charge $200 or whatever a sports pass is for that 37,000 student population.
yeah. It was
uh
170 at UT when I went there, but that's been 20 years. I have no idea what it is now.
yeah, it's some amount of money that they have to pay, but it's not nearly as much as it would be if kids were having to buy student tickets or trying to buy a game ticket for a particular game. And it's a different environment. They have 72,000 students in the College Station. So
Yeah. I do wonder too. I mean, how much of that we've talked about the geography of the University of Texas, it doesn't really build itself out to. And one of the things I'm interested in because my brother-in-law Nathan's a regular listener, and well, what? Now that I think about it, he didn't go his freshman year either. Because I don't know what it's like to be an arriving freshman at UT. Where do you get the orientation? Like I know fish camp at A&M's the thing, right? Like
mhm.
I don't know if UT has an equivalent to that. I'd have to ask Jessica. That she's probably drunk to most of that too. So I don't know.
According to my son, yes, they do. I don't know how much he attended of it. It's
Okay.
not the, again, cult terms. It's not the indoctrination you get at A&M. It's more like an info session amongst other things,
Yeah.
from what I understand. I think it's more than it was when we were in high school and considering colleges. But I couldn't tell you exactly what Texas does. I know a lot of schools have copied the model that A&M does. Baylor has a bear camp. Texas Tech has something similar. U of H even does something similar now. So I'm sure Texas has a bigger
Commuter school
program,
camp. Is that what they call it?
something like that. You could also go to HCC camp. Yes.
Yeah. Well, and I do think that's well, I mean, I know we're way off the rails here, but I certainly hope they do because college is a big scary thing for a lot of people and finding any way to get an in. I know Jessica for her freshman year was a Dish Falk Diamond, and that was kind of her way to find something to do.
Yeah,
Um,
and I think that's as much shit as we get about being a cult, that's the purpose of T camp and fish camp, and I think there's Howdy camp still, for transfers or people who come in mid semester, or people who come in as freshmen. It wasn't so much about learning the traditions and knowing what you're supposed to do at a football game as much as we're going to put you in a group that hopefully you make a few friends
Yeah.
at your freshman year that you can, grow friendships with over the course of your college career. Because outside of the core, it's really hard to do that when there's 72,000 students.
And you're all
It's
going
hard to
to,
do that with 40,000 students.
yeah, absolutely.
So
Big.
that was always been really more of the intent. And they're fun if you don't mind embarrassing yourself.
Like Jessica, I know when you used to, I've been to Bonfire before. Jessica's been. Um, I wanted to talk a little bit about the game itself. We might as well should as we wrap up. A&M has everything out in front of it. All they gotta do is control their own destiny. I know that clearly if you lose Saturday, it's gonna be disappointment. Or if you lose in the SEC championship game, it's disappointment. But you still have to step back, right, and say this was a team with injuries and a team with a crisis of confidence in a quarterback, and you still outpaced last year's squad by 3 games. I got to
Yeah,
think that's a successful thing.
well, it is, but as we talked about in the first version of this show, when you get to 8 wins and you still have 4 games to go, you're like, or 3 games to go, you're like, well, we should win 10. And that's not going to happen now without winning Saturday and then winning a bowl game or an SEC championship game. Um, so your expectations changed during the year. I think Vegas had us 7.5. That was the over/under line for wins for A&M. So
Sure.
we've surpassed that. I think for the first year in Mike Elko's tenure at Texas A&M, this has been a successful year. The problem is the success happened on the front end and in the middle and not on the back end. So perception is often what's the last thing that happened to me,
Sure.
and so that's kind of where we are right now.
You
We've
you
played
can be an
really well,
amazing lover all your marriage and you have one bad night and you're like, well,
and it happens to every guy, and
happens to
it's
everyone. I'm told it's normal
yeah, it is. It's not normal. It doesn't happen to
to
everyone.
everyone. Wow. And it is
Um,
a big deal. Look at that Friends reference all of a sudden.
there you go.
And that's
Uh,
season 3, I think. That's early.
yeah. So on the whole, I think we're going to be able to look back and say that A&M's had a successful season relative to expectations. The problem is that expectations have changed the fan base. Elko also has to deal with all the baggage of massive expectations that came with Jimbo Fisher came, and our idiot chancellor handed him a blank trophy, and we have
That
the
whole
number one
thing, yeah.
recruiting class of all time, and all the things that were supposed to happen that just didn't happen outside of we built some really cool facilities.
Um,
And fans don't give a shit about the locker room. It's cool for the recruits, but
and it's
great,
cool
get
to
a
see
locker
on
room.
game day the one time they show it. And other than
Yeah,
that, yeah.
but ultimately we care about winning games, and it's got to start Saturday for us. Having said that, there's a lot more pressure or a lot more benefit for A&M winning this game than there is for Texas winning this game on Saturday. I'm not saying Texas isn't going to try. I'm not saying Sark doesn't want to play for the SEC championship. I'm not saying you couldn't beat Georgia. What I'm saying is that if you lose Saturday, you're probably still in the playoffs and you have a few weeks to heal up your quarterback and scheme for whoever your first opponent's going to be and host a home game. If we lose Saturday, we are waiting to find out if the Belk Bowl is going to invite us or if we're looking at the Beef O'Brady Bowl or something along those lines.
Okay, so a couple of questions because I saw Nick Saban breaking that same thing down that in many ways it's better to miss the championship game and then play the first week as opposed to having the bye going into the second week, playing a playoff game at home and getting rolling. But you feel relatively confident that Texas is probably in the playoff because their 2 losses literally are the ones playing for the SEC championship game.
Barring something ridiculous and barring something happening like A&M just beats the brakes off you guys, and I'm talking like a 45-10 type of win, you're in the playoffs. Um, I don't see a path that you wouldn't be at 10-2.
Then why have the play? Why have these championship games? What's the point?
The point's always money. I think if any coach in public is going to say, of course, we want to play for the championship, we want to play this game. But now that you've introduced this 12-team playoff, especially now that you've introduced this 12-team playoff, these championship games are more traps and elimination rounds for what is, record wise, at least the second best team in your conference.
Mm-hmm.
Because if A&M doesn't, let's say A&M beats Texas and loses to Georgia, they're not going to the playoffs, even though they're the second best team in the SEC.
Sure.
And so ultimately, until they replace the money, you're going to keep playing them. But all these coaches, these same coaches that want to play and want to win, if you ask them in private, would you like to play in the SEC championship or would you like to be in the playoffs? They're going to pick the playoffs every time. Um, and ultimately, these championship games should go out of vogue if, common sense ever prevailed. But I don't know if common sense is ever going to overcome the massive amount of money that is generated by these championship games.
Common sense in the form of the super conference. Last thing before our final thoughts. We had predicted that Oklahoma was going to end up becoming Nebraska, which I think last Saturday notwithstanding seems like they're on their way. One of the things that I was thinking though is it's entirely possible for Texas and A&M to become the center of the SEC. It's entirely possible that with Texas entering the SEC, it actually will also help A&M's recruiting because now you get that back. Plus, it's another home game in your same state. You're not going somewhere else. It's interesting to see it with as Alabama's downfall is starting, and we could see Mike Shula era level Alabama again. Do you think that's possible that we just start looking at it as the two teams to beat in the SEC are Texas and A&M, and everybody else roll the dice and take their chances?
I mean, there's a world where that could happen. My hesitation with answering that is at least one of those schools has never lived up to those expectations, or at least not in the last several decades. Um, so that would be a big leap for A&M to consistently perform at the level where this is, the road goes through College Station, the road goes through the state of Texas. It could happen. It should happen with the amount of money and resources that we have and the ability to generate NIL funds. And honestly, I heard your comment about recruiting. We don't suffer in recruiting. We've
Right.
never had a problem, certainly not in the last 12 years, recruiting players.
Both schools, even when down. I mean,
Yeah,
you held on to your recruiting class despite firing Jimbo Fisher. Like most
yeah.
schools don't have
So
that.
yeah, all the factors for to be able to support two top tier, and I mean consistently top 10 Division I teams, live in Texas. They exist in Texas. You have the best recruiting ground in the world. You're right next to 1A if you want to talk about Louisiana. Um, if LSU continues to run this Brian Kelly experiment, you might have a lot more
He
options
needs a
there.
new accent, bro. That's what it is. He needs a
Yeah,
third
you
one.
need to change that weekly. Um, the money's there. We're going to start drill baby drill, so the oil money's going to be there for our schools. There's a lot of factors in favor for both of these schools, but ultimately they have to perform. Texas has to continue to do what they've done the last 2 years under Sark. A&M's got to get to that level. Could they? Yes. I will, wait and see patiently for that to happen. I've been waiting for a number of years for A&M to do that. And I'm also spoiled by the fact that when I went to school, we didn't lose home games. And I know it was a Southwest Conference and it was down, but we won games we were supposed to win. And
Sure.
we used to demolish people. And it's just, I
And you
feel
went
bad for
during the
students.
period, right, where A&M was really running Texas. Because like
Yes.
I went when Mac Brown did really well against A&M.
Yeah. I mean, there was a almost a decade of dominance. I think it was 10 of 11 or 11 of 12 over Texas at one point, and that's certainly the best stretch that A&M has had in the series. Um, so it's certainly something that's possible. I feel bad for students for the last couple of decades because outside of 2012 and 2020 and maybe 1998, it's been kind of slim pickings. And you have your individual highlight moments and you make your own college memories and all that kind of fun stuff. But it sure is fun when your football team's winning. And it sure is fun when they win big games. And it's even better when they win big games at home. And, selfishly, I hope that's what happens on Saturday.
Oh yeah,
Um,
totally. Yeah, I get
I'm
it.
not predicting it.
Yeah, well, I don't really want to predict the game either. I want you and I to be able to be zen and be excited that the game is happening because of our friendship and everything else, and not buy into all of the BS that's happening. Paul Feinbaum. All right, well, that's about wraps this up. Andy, any closing thoughts before we head out?
I mean, the secret is nobody likes Paul Feinbaum.
Well, there you go. All right. I guess my final thought is I just hope the rivalry stays what it is and not does not become too Twitterfied by people who don't have a stake in either university because I know you and I have kind of both abandoned our Twitter presence for greener or bluer pastures, I guess, but um that's the last thing I want. I don't want it to become um as toxic as say Yankees, Red Sox, or something like that. I want it to stay kind of what it's always been because like you said before, so many familiar connections in and of that. I kind of get harassed by Longhorn friends because every time one of my kids gets into A&M, I take a photo with them with my thumb up and everything else. Like I'm gonna what we love about each other should matter more than this game should the excitement about this game should be from now until about an hour after it's over and then back to whatever it was before.
Well, and not to be too kumbaya about it, but I'll say it constantly. The kids that go to these schools are far more similar than they are different. They come from the same places. It's no longer the era of the, excuse me, the farm kids go to A&M and the city kids go to Texas. Uh,
The draft dodgers go to Texas is out.
yeah, and the hardcore veterans return from the war and decide to go A&M. That's just it's not that. Um, it's two flagship universities playing each other in the largest sport in this country. And that's a lot, but that's ultimately all it is. Because at the end of the day, no matter who wins or loses, sun's going to rise the next day. We're going to get excited about playing each other in basketball. We're really going to get excited about playing each other in baseball, even though it's going to be at Dish Falk for 3 games. Got
That's
to get rid
probably
of it.
best for Schwarzenegger's life, honestly.
Yeah, are you getting rid of the turf? You need to get rid of the turf.
That's actually been really high on CDC's thing is he doesn't want turf anywhere. He wants to be natural grass everywhere. He's been talking about that since he came in. Um, to me, there's no excuse. We have the best ag university 90 miles away. They could probably help us figure out how to grow some grass, I would think.
We'd love to help you grow grass. It might change colors every couple of weeks, but
Yeah,
that's a
we
small
got,
price to pay.
you do have a history of that. All right, Andy, hook 'em horns. It's going to be a good weekend, man.
Gig 'em and happy Thanksgiving.